In the news tonight, His Majesty the King and visiting Tunisian President hold summit talks and attend the signing of cooperation agreements in the areas of civil protection, civil defense, security and military fields. Mahmoud Abbas says Palestinians are increasingly frustrated with the failure of peace talks to achieve statehood as clashes continue on the streets of Ramallah and elsewhere in the West Bank. And the stream of migrants and refugees crossing from Croatia into Slovenia on foot continues as police escort some 2,000 exhausted people towards a reception center. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King and Tunisian President Baji Qaid Sibsi on a state visit to the kingdom discussed an array of issues, including enhanced bilateral cooperation in the political, economic, military and security fields, as well as ongoing developments in the region. In a one-on-one meeting followed by expanded talks attended by top officials from both sides, the King and Sibsi called for promoting economic ties through the Joint Higher Committee, namely in the fields of information technology, energy, health, education and tourism. King Abdullah said Jordan and Tunisia are facing common challenges, whether in the fight against poverty and unemployment or in hosting an influx of refugees and in confronting extremism and terror. The talks also dealt with the Israeli escalations in the West Bank and Jerusalem and the situation in Syria. His Majesty and the Tunisian President later attended the signing of cooperation agreements in the fields of civil protection and civil defense, as well as security and military affairs. King Abdullah bestowed on the Tunisian President the Supreme Order of the Renaissance, Wissam al-Nahda. His Majesty also held a lunch banquet in honor of the Tunisian guest, and in attendance were senior officials from both sides. Separately, His Majesty discussed with Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa during a telephone conversation bilateral ties as well as ongoing developments in the region. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said Palestinians are increasingly frustrated with the failure of peace talks to achieve statehood. Speaking in Ramallah during a joint statement with visiting Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė, he said Palestinian youth have become desperate over the Israeli government's failure and absence of any political future. In her remarks, the Lithuanian president said she comes from a country that can relate to the Palestinians, adding that her people eventually achieved their goals through peaceful means.
Today we held talks with Madam President, and I briefed her and her delegation about the situation in Palestine and the difficult and unbearable circumstances our people are living under because of the continuous Israeli occupation to our homeland amidst the increasing settler aggression that have led our youth to be pressured and desperate over the Israeli government's failure and the absence of any political future that would provide a hope of a fair and just peace, allowing our people to be independent beside the state of Israel.
Lithuania very much understands the goals, the hopes your country has. We also have large neighbors. We learned how to survive. We learned how to fight for our independence, and we made it. But we made it peacefully. And I wish you the same. I wish your nation peace. I wish your nation prosperity, and never have any wars with anybody.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon made a snap visit to the region to try to quell 3 weeks of Israeli-Palestinian violence. He urged Palestinians and Israelis to step back from what he called a dangerous abyss. Speaking right after arriving in Jerusalem, he said the wave of unrest is undermining Palestinian hopes for statehood and Israel's security. We must come back from this dangerous abyss, safeguard the two-state solution and lead people back onto the road towards peace, he said. Ban was to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. In a video message to Israelis and Palestinians released prior to his arrival, Ban said, "Do not allow the extremists on either side to use religion to further fuel the conflict."
I urge the youth of Palestine, as the future of your people and society, to turn your frustration into a strong but peaceful voice for change. Demand that your leaders act responsibly to protect your future. Demand progress for a political solution from your leaders, from Israeli leaders, and from the international community. I'm not asking you to be passive, but you must put down the weapons of despair. There is no so-called security solution. You, the people of Israel, as much as the Palestinian people, need to see a political horizon to break this cycle of violence and fear.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is to hold talks with the Israeli Prime Minister either during a visit to the region or in Germany tomorrow. Speaking during a conference in Washington, Kerry said Palestinian and Israeli leaders need to clarify the status of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to help stop the violence. Kerry also plans to meet with President Mahmoud Abbas and with His Majesty King Abdullah in Amman later this week.
The States has a special role to play. We accept that responsibility. I accept it. And I look forward to these meetings as an opportunity to try to pull people back from a precipice and try to move down a road, because everybody understands that in the end it requires a political solution. It requires two states living side by side in peace with two peoples appropriately honored with their countries and with security. And it takes leadership to get there. So we're going to do everything in our power to try to see if we can calm things down and find a way forward.
Clashes continued meanwhile between Palestinian protesters and Israeli soldiers in the West Bank city of Ramallah. A Palestinian was shot dead by the Israeli army after he allegedly carried out a run-over attack against Israeli settlers near Bethlehem, according to Palestinian sources. Palestinian media and Israeli soldiers opened fire at the Palestinian, unidentified yet, for allegedly running over settlers near Gush Etzion junction south of Bethlehem. The man was killed instantly. Elsewhere, Israeli soldiers shot tear gas bombs and rubber-coated bullets at Palestinian protesters who threw stones at Israeli vehicles. Several protesters suffered from suffocation due to tear gas bombs. Across the West Bank, at least 35 Palestinians were detained today as Israel resumed punitive home demolitions of suspected Palestinian attackers. Almost 3 weeks of violence has killed 44 Palestinians and 9 Israelis. Earlier today, Russia's defense ministry said its planes have flown 55 sorties and struck 60 Daesh targets in Syria in the last 24 hours. The ministry said the strikes hit Daesh and Nusra targets in the provinces of Hama, Latakia, Damascus, Aleppo, Idlib and Deir ez-Zor. In a separate report, a rebel commander of the 1st Coastal Division Group and 4 other fighters were said to be killed by Russian airstrikes in Latakia province. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the airstrike in Jabal Akrad, a rural mountainous area in the province, killed 45 people, including rebels and civilians. The group, which fights under the umbrella of the Free Syrian Army, confirmed the death of its chief of staff, Basil Zamo, formerly a captain in the Syrian military. The commander of another group, the Nur al-Din al-Zinki brigades, was killed in fighting south of Aleppo yesterday, according to the observatory. There were also reports of casualties on the Russian side, according to Syrian military sources. At least 3 Russians fighting alongside Syrian forces were killed and several more wounded when a shell hit their position in Latakia, said the military source. Head of the Syrian Observatory, Rami Abdurrahman, however, said he believed the Russians were not regular forces but volunteers. The Russian Defense Ministry later denied reports of any casualties among soldiers from the Russian armed forces in Syria. Meanwhile, U.S.-led forces carried out 17 airstrikes against Daesh terrorists in Iraq and Syria over the past 24 hours, according to a statement by the Combined Joint Task Force. In Iraq, 8 strikes were conducted in Sinjar, destroying dozens of militant fighting positions, vehicles, assembly areas, and command and control nodes. Other strikes hit near Ramadi, Tal Afar, Mosul, and Makhmur, while in Syria, 2 strikes were carried out in Raqqa and Tel Jibin. And to avoid an inadvertent clash over Syria, U.S. and Russian military officials signed a memorandum of understanding that includes steps their pilots should take. Pentagon spokesman Peter Cook said the full text of the memo would not be released at Russia's request, but included specific protocols for air crews to follow, plus the creation of a ground communications link between the two sides in the event air communications fail. Cook said the memo calls for aircraft to maintain a safe distance, but he declined to be more specific about whether the protocols included specific distances. The stream of migrants and refugees crossing from Croatia into Slovenia on foot continued as police escorted some 2,000 exhausted people through fields near the Slovenian town of Brežice towards a reception center. Slovenia's Interior Ministry said some 19,500 migrants have entered Slovenia since Hungary sealed its southern border with Croatia. Slovenia said earlier this week it would deploy the army to guard its border and appealed for help from the European Union as migrants streamed through the tiny country. Here's more.
Sheer exhaustion. Children and their families spend another day along the muddy border between Serbia and Croatia. Cold, hungry, some without shoes, migrants here are awaiting word on where they'll be allowed to go next. With some Balkan countries closing their borders and others imposing limits on how many people can come in, a backlog is forming.
But of course, with what happened, Hungary closing the border with Croatia, and then some, constraints about numbers has led to this place becoming more of a bottleneck, as we call it. So meaning that people are stranded here because it's a limited number of people who are allowed in, and that is something new, and it's to do with the closure of borders elsewhere.
Already having traveled a long journey from Syria or elsewhere in the Middle East, thousands of new migrants are arriving daily, but aren't being allowed to continue to Germany or other EU countries. Frustrations are rising, scuffles break out after waiting for hours in the cold. Some try to keep their sense of humor.
But you know, it's a big problem here, about 6,000 people. It's not your fault, it's our fault. We're bad people.
The EU has agreed to share 120,000 migrants among its members, a small portion of the some 700,000 expected to reach Europe's borders this year.
Back here at home, 57 representatives of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and 6 Mediterranean countries are meeting at a 2-day conference by the Dead Sea shores to discuss security opportunities and challenges in the Mediterranean region. Foreign Expatriate Affairs Minister Nasser Jude attended the discussions alongside German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier and State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Serbia, Roksanda Ninic. 40 years after the Helsinki Final Act, which maintained that security in Europe is closely linked with security in the Mediterranean area as a whole, the session highlighted the manifold common challenges, but also opportunities that the OSCE area and the Mediterranean share. And over to Canada. 43-year-old Justin Trudeau, the son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, will be Canada's next Prime Minister after a federal election that ended the divisive reign of the Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The Liberals seized an unprecedented turn in political fortunes that smashed the record for the number of seats gained from one election to the next. Stephen Harper conceded defeat, ending his government's 9-year run in power. Here's more.
Canada's Liberal Party leader, Justin Trudeau, has won a stunning victory to become the country's next Prime Minister. The 43-year-old addressed supporters in Montreal.
This is what positive politics can do. This is what a positive, hopeful vision and a platform and a team together can make happen. Canadians from all across this great country sent a clear message tonight. It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change.
The Liberals' victory marks an end to the Conservatives' 9-year run in power and reflected a political shift from Prime Minister Stephen Harper's brand of fiscal and cultural conservatism. Harper thanked his supporters during a concession speech.
Canadians have elected a Liberal government, a result we accept without hesitation. I have spoken, friends, to Mr. Trudeau and offered him my congratulations, all of our congratulations, on his successful campaign.
Trudeau is the son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Justin will become the second youngest Prime Minister in Canadian history and brings an appeal more common in movie stars than statesmen.
Latin America's leading fashion event, the 40th edition of the Sao Paulo Fashion Week, kicked off with some of Brazil's top designers showing off their latest winter lines. Rio de Janeiro-based high-end women's label Animal showcased its collection that included clean, flowing looks, accentuated by large overcoats and bags to complement solid colors of black, white and earth tones splashed with reds and greens. In another show, Uma followed up with equally bold looks for the label's show. The collection had a lot of mixture in materials, mixing a lot of luxury and comfort. Sao Paulo Fashion Week is regarded as the world's 5th largest fashion week and is considered the premier fashion event in Latin America. It runs through Friday. FIFA's presidential elections will go ahead as planned on February 26 next year. Following an extraordinary meeting of FIFA's Executive Committee in Zurich today, FIFA confirmed the elective Congress will be held on the original date. The provisional 90-day suspension of Sepp Blatter and UEFA chief Michel Platini had led to calls for the elections to be brought forward or suspended. The Executive Committee, however, said Platini may be allowed to run for president of FIFA if he wins an appeal against his ban. So far, the candidates registered to run for president are His Royal Highness Prince Ali ibn al-Hussein and former Trinidad and Tobago midfielder David Naked. Asian soccer chief Sheikh Salman bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa of Bahrain today said he had been urged to stand but was still thinking about it. During the Tour de France 2016. Organizers revealed the route of the Tour. The race starts at Mont Saint-Michel. Over 21 stages, the Tour riders will traverse France and visit Switzerland, Spain and Andorra. They will ride an expected 3,500 kilometers with 9 flat stages, 2 individual time trials, 1 medium mountain stage and 9 full mountain stages. After struggling through cobbled sections and battling crosswinds in the opening of racing this year, the contenders will be thanking their lucky stars that the first week will be much less treacherous next time around. And finally, fair weather continues for the rest of tonight in most regions with southwesterly moderate to brisk winds and a chance for rain. Tomorrow, moderate conditions prevail with a continued chance for rain showers in the southern and eastern regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot conditions with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly high seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King and visiting Tunisian President hold summit talks and attend the signing of cooperation agreements in the areas of civil protection, civil defense, security and military fields. Mahmoud Abbas says Palestinians are increasingly frustrated with the failure of peace talks to achieve statehood as clashes continue on the streets of Ramallah and elsewhere in the West Bank. And the stream of migrants and refugees crossing from Croatia into Slovenia on foot continues as police escort some 2,000 exhausted people towards a reception center. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.